Great. Thank you so much, Frank Jotzo, for joining us tonight. Really appreciate your time. It's a real pleasure to have you along. You've been a lead author on Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports. The language in these reports could not be clearer about the need to make immediate, deep cuts to emissions across all sectors of our economy. And yet here we are with a plan to cut pollution by half of what we need. What does it feel like to work on these IPCC reports and to know what you know?
Well, the science is really clear. We need to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions dramatically in order to avoid the worst of climate change impacts. But the message is also a very positive one from the summary of the science as we have it from the IPCC, and that is we can do this. We can do it more easily than we thought we might be able to in the past. Primarily because the technologies exist and the technologies are rapidly becoming cheaper. And we now understand how a low emissions economy is a sustainable economy, is an economy that brings economic prosperity, and that can also be a benefit for social outcomes through energy, access, equity. And so all of these things are making it much more readily possible to meet the challenge, or to meet the challenge to some extent, than what we thought possible 5 or 10 years ago.
What needs to happen here in Australia to put us in a position to respond to the climate crisis at a scale and a pace that's going to solve the problem?
In Australia, we have a very high emissions economy, one that is built around cheap and available fossil fuels. That needs to dramatically change, and we need to move to a near zero carbon economy. And the wonderful thing is it's eminently possible in Australia to do this. And in fact, it's already starting. And the key is, of course, the practically unlimited opportunity that we have in reliable and cheap renewable energy, solar and wind, principally covered through energy storage. And those will be the energy systems of the future, and they will power our industries, they will power our homes, they will power our transport, and they will increasingly help in agriculture as well.
You've spoken about the need for deep decarbonisation. What does that mean?
By deep decarbonization, we mean a fundamental change of industrial energy and transport systems to shift to a zero emissions basis. We don't just mean incremental change, we mean new technologies that run without greenhouse gas emissions or extremely low greenhouse gas emissions. And so marginal improvement would be the shift from a normal car to a hybrid drivetrain. Systems transition, deep decarbonization is the shift to an electric car that is then charged entirely using renewable energy, solar power and wind power in our case. That's what we're after. That's what needs to happen. It needs to happen in a power system where it's already going on. We have a direct transition from coal-fired power to wind and solar already happening in Australia. That transition needs to accelerate. That zero carbon electricity supply will then enable a zero carbon electrification in transport, in industry, in the building sector, everywhere else in the economy. And so that deep systems change is what is needed and what we will increasingly see happen.
A lot of people are feeling hopeful about the opportunities that come with a change in government. What do you think the key opportunities are over the next term of Parliament?
The new federal government has a suite of policies that they plan to introduce in industry, to an extent in power and transport as well. Much more can be done. We can go beyond the 43% emission reduction target. And in fact, the next cab off the rank, so to speak, will be a 2035 emissions target. And that will need to go much further on the road to net zero by 2050 or earlier on. And so what we need to see is governments facilitating very large investments in the power sector, in the revamp of Australian industry, in R&D for the agricultural sector to make Australian agriculture and land-based activities climate-proof, more resilient to climate change impacts, and also more adept to using the opportunities to shift towards lower emissions products and processes. So all of that requires a very large effort. Federal government has an important part to play in this, but the state and territory government governments as well as local governments matter significantly in this as well, in particular in responding to climate change impacts as they will come to us.
And finally, what gives you hope?
There's tremendous reason for optimism on the technology side of things, in particular in moving to very low emission settings. We now know how to do this, and we are confident that we can do this in a way that actually benefits the Australian economy. Another thing to be very, very hopeful about is the extent of engagement right throughout society on the issue of climate change. This is something that has really proven to rally people behind a common cause. And that is, of course, a tremendously positive thing, not only to tackle climate change, but also for a sense of purpose and a shared sense of mission that so many of us have.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time tonight.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks a lot.